right, here we go, everybody. Hey, everybody. Thanks very much for hanging out with again. Todd-Versation presents Todd-Bits. Round 3. Yes, I'm saying it out loud. Round 3. She's back again. I haven't upset her. I haven't done anything wrong. I love it. Please, everybody, give it up for the one, the only, Dr. Jennifer Tucker with the National Organic Program. Jenny, welcome, welcome, welcome.
3 times a charm, Todd. It's great to see you.
Thank you. You're my leading guest. I was just sharing with you. I said, I've got a second one. I got number 2 coming somewhere else, but you are leading the pack. You're setting the bar so high for everybody. And I love the fact that it's you setting that bar.
I enjoy talking to you, Todd. This is fun.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Well, this is kind of a fun one because we're going to come full circle. We did a pre-NOSB show, and now we're doing a post-NOSB show and download a little bit of what happened, kind of get some perspective from you. I've got a few questions I want to throw at you about the process and some of the things that I listened to in the time that I was able to jump in and out of the Zoom meeting. So with no further ado, let's go do this because I think people are going to be excited to hear what you got to say and some of the things that are coming. I mean, it's an exciting time. It's a great time to be in the organic business. There's no two ways about it. So meeting number 2 that was virtual, if my score count and my scorekeeping is correct.
This was 1,
3?
2, 3, 4. Yeah,
4.
we started in April 2020. So it's literally been 2 years. Yeah, time flies, but this is our 4th virtual meeting.
Well, I still think it's like, the 487th day of March 2020, the way things are going right now. So so virtual again this time. How was it? I mean, as far as the attendance goes and the participation factor, because it is a different environment, right? Because being in the room, when you feel the energy of the people and the crowd and the questions and the comments and the board, it's a whole different vibe than it is, you can kind of get virtually, unless of course it's you and I talking, then it's a very high level. But nonetheless, I mean, so how was the attendance?
So attendance was strong again.
The
benefit of the online version is that more people can attend. And so you literally have farmers who have earbuds and when they're on the tractor listening to the NOSB meeting and during public comments, you literally have people, wait, I'm going to stop driving my tractor and give you my public comment and then go back to my tractor. And so I think it opens up doors for folks who might otherwise not be able to participate. And you really miss that interpersonal, bodies in rooms connecting with each other. There is something very important about that in just the human condition. So I do hope that in the future, we'll have the best of both worlds where we're able to be in a room together while also broadcasting the main meeting, which we haven't done, but I think we are committed to doing when we get back into together, real life together mode.
I love that. I think it's important because, in talking about participation, it's something that you and I talked about the very first time we got together. It was something we really, I think, talked about in depth the last time we got together. And I'm going to bring it up this time. Look, this process is only as good as we're willing to participate in the process. And, to hear the positivity that you're laying down, that's, hey, it was well attended. We did get people that were on tractors that were, that's a huge plus because that, we need those voices in this process to continue down this path of creating the very best national organic program we possibly can and protect the interest of all stakeholders across, all channels. So I think that is super, super cool to hear. And I'm really excited to hear that you guys are looking at both in person and then recording and being able to have more folks join, because in this digital world that we live in, there's no reason not to take advantage of trying to get everybody that we possibly can involved in this process. And I love that. So kudos. Go, you have my support. I have cameras. I'll give you one. I got all kinds of crappy lights. I'll send them to you, whatever you need. Let's do this because I think it's super, super important. So before I ask you my kind of questions, give us a little bit of your highlights that you'd like to share about the meeting.
I think one of the highlights then was really mentioned at the end of the meeting, but I'd like to say it here, was how collaborative and respectful this board is, that we have 14 board members who really had at it on some important topics for which there was a lot of disagreement and conflict, and yet we're able to really have an in-depth, respectful, collaborative dialogue with each other where the public could really witness what democracy looks like. And there were some good chats in as we
Yeah.
were meeting from the community saying, it's messy, but this is democracy. And to be kind of a model of that public process, I think is very, very, very gratifying. And I'm so impressed with this board's ability to hear each other and engage in really respectful, healthy ways. So that really stood out for me.
I love that. Well, you're right. Democracy can be messy. The outcome can be beautiful, but the process can be messy, right? But I think what's important is that we remember is that we've got to be a part of the process to judge whether it's messy or not messy at the end, right? I'm going to say it again.
Yep. And I think we did get a good mix of public comment. So a lot of different participants in the public comment process. There was a waiting list for comments. We weren't able to get to everybody who wanted to give a comment. And that I think is good news when you have more people who want to give comments. And so I think the meeting went very well with a lot of very, very respectful and thoughtful work by the board.
I love it. So I want to get into any other highlights you want to share? I'm going to start throwing you some other questions. Anything else?
That's the real memorable one for me.
Good.
There's so many different topics we could dive into, but I think it's really the quality of the conversation among the board members. I think is worth highlighting.
I agree with that. So I'm going to throw a few questions out, and one of which is I want to just ask to start off with the Federal Register. And the reason I ask that question is that I imagine if I asked 5 people what that actually is, I'd probably get one right, 2 close, one I don't, probably thought it was a newspaper or whatever. But can you just really explain what the Federal Register is? And then I'm going to throw you a question about that.
Yeah, so let's talk about the Federal Register. The Federal Register is the tool that the entire government uses to communicate to the public. And so the Federal Register is like a huge newspaper that points to a lot of articles. And so it's almost like, there's no real good analogy. The Federal Register, it's online, it's published every single day. And anytime the government changes a rule, so does rulemaking, it'll come into play with our conversation here. Anytime we do a rule or we want to announce a meeting in a way that we want to ensure that the public has an opportunity to participate, it gets published in the Federal Register. And so it's a centralized repository of government communication. And it is the tool through which we communicate about meetings and any changes to the rules that people need to know about.
Right. So with that, my question leading up to this is that, so you put something out in the Federal Register and it sits there for 60 days, could be 90, could be 60, 30, whatever the amount of days that you want comment period on. If something's sitting on there, and let's say, for instance, you put it on day 1, but on day 47, there's new information, there's new data, there's something that wasn't necessarily brought forth prior to it getting, published. Does that have any impact on final decisions that you guys make? Whether an item whether it's listed, delisted, it's part of the process. I guess, in other words, could you have the ability to kind of issue a final rule around something that maybe doesn't necessarily follow the original NOSB recommendation?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So there are 3 phases that happen here. There's the NOSB recommendation. And so there's a whole lot of public comment that happens before the NOSB recommendation. It comes to us as a recommendation when the board passes it. So 2/3 majority, a decisive vote, it comes to us. Then we will do a proposed rule. We talk about the proposed rule in the Federal Register. So that's the tool by which we announce that there's this proposed rule that's open for public comment. Public comment is usually about 60 days for rules, and usually. Now, during that public comment period, anyone in the public can comment. And in fact, there are folks who comment on rules that don't participate in the NOSB process. And while we want everybody to participate in both arenas, the public comments received during rulemaking are as important as the ones that are received during the board process. And so if once a proposed rule is published, then there are public comments, and then we close it, then we review all those comments and decide what the final rule is going to be. Now, what's interesting is how much change there can happen there. So there's a change between an NOSB recommendation and rulemaking, and then between a proposed rule and a final rule. So let's take the first one first. What happens between an NOSB recommendation and a proposed rule? So I'm going to use an example of national list where the board recommends removing items from the national list. So we will do a proposed rule that explains what the board recommended. The board recommended that we remove this item and then includes any analysis we do. And that's where new information may come in, where, well, there's this information, there's that information based on AMS's, our Agricultural Marketing Service, independent analysis. Here's the agency's position on that NOSB recommendation. Then the public has an opportunity to comment on that full set of knowledge. So we can introduce things in rulemaking that might have been slightly different from the NOSB recommendation based not only on new information, but also alignment with the Organic Foods Production Act.
Right.
Now, between the proposed rule and the final rule, in general, something needs to have been proposed in a proposed rule to go final. So we can't say, well, here was the proposal, and then in a final rule say, well, forget all that. Here's this brand new thing and go implement. So there does need to be a direct line between a proposed rule and a final rule. Now, if public comments come in and say, we don't like that provision of a proposed rule, as long as it was considered and asked during the proposed rule, it can go final. So for example, back to our removals, it could be that a proposed rule proposes to remove something, and then we get all sorts of comments that say, no, 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 you can't remove that. We desperately need it. Then we can change our mind, because the question was, should we remove this or not? We got some comments that said, or not. That means we can, in a final rule, do something very different from what the board recommended based on that public comment process. So there's really those many steps to get to a final policy decision.
Right. Thank you. And I appreciate that's a beautiful explanation. And it goes back to our mantra of participation one more time, that it goes to show you that you've got to be a part of this entire process. You just can't have one, you can't put a toe in the pool, right? We need everybody to jump on in, put some waders on your arm, whatever it takes to get you floating, especially down to the deep end. We need you in the pool. So thank you for that, because I think it's really important that people understand that it's just not all of a sudden, you know, it's not like opening up a menu saying we're going to have scrambled eggs today. It is a thought process that involves, where are the chickens? How's it going to happen? Where's it going to go? You know, all of this is together. So yeah, and very cool.
The conflict occurs if people comment between a proposed rule and a final rule, but didn't comment at the board. Then the board rightly says, well, wait, why didn't you tell us that before? It might have changed our recommendation. And so then it causes, when we do something different than the board wanted, it causes frustration for everybody. If everybody participated along the whole way, we'd have much better clarity from the very beginning as to the full range of opinions out there, which makes the process richer.
Absolutely. Well, look, everybody in this involved is a stakeholder. And if you're going to be a stakeholder, pound your stake in the ground and hold on to something, and let's go. Right.
And it's multiple stakes. It's multiple stakes. So pound your stake at every stage of the process.
Right. Cool. Thank you. And I appreciate that. And I hope that gives people some clarity of again, back to participating and why it is so important.
Yes.
So one of the things that came out of this meeting that I thought was kind of interesting, and I wanted to touch on a little bit, is that sometimes it seems the recommendations might be a little contradictory at sometimes. And this one came up this time, and I want to talk about it. The NOSB made a recommendation about climate smart ag. They wrote a really nice letter, the whole 9 yards, and the importance of it, and how organics is going to help with climate, and rightfully so. I'm on board. I get it. I see it. The data supports the positivity of all. But then they voted and overwhelmingly decided that organically sourced ammonia extract would be prohibited, right, as a prohibited substance, in spite of the fact that they have the ability to manufacturing, through the manufacturing process, to significantly reduce things like methane and nitrous oxide, can't even talk out loud, emissions relative to like what's happening with current manuring and composting practices. So it's kind of this little bit of a yin and yang. So I guess my question to you is, does the USDA and the NOP kind of have a responsibility to kind of reconcile these recommendations that maybe are a little bit philosophically conflicted in some ways? Or does each recommendation just kind of stand on its own, on its own merit? Because to me, it seems a little bit confusing, and I think kind of hard to me would be kind of like, well, what do I do here? Type scenario.
Yeah, it's an interesting observation and a really good question. And so I think that happens.
2 for 2, Jenny. 2 for 2. That's why you're here a third time. I am 2 for 2 today.
There we go. And so our primary driver in evaluating any recommendation is alignment with the Organic Foods Production Act. And I think alongside participation, that's another really key theme that I want to hit here, is that recommendations need to be within the purview of the Organic Foods Production Act. And so on something like ammonia extracts, you're talking about proposing a prohibited natural, and there aren't a whole lot of prohibited naturals on the national list. So I think that in itself is a very sort of interesting question. In terms of potential conflicts, I think a lot of the conflicts that happen in organic where it seems contradictory is because people are looking at a different part of the system. If you are only looking at that field and the soil and the plant in that field, and that's the system of interest, that's going to be a different answer than if you're looking at the operation wide. So, for example, folks who don't like a soil less production because they say it doesn't use soil, well, there is the maintaining and improving soil and water quality at an operation level, which might be different from a field level or a pot level. And so what system are you looking at? Are you looking at the pot? Are you looking at the field? Are you looking at the operation? Are you looking at the planet? And so I think the biodegradable mulch is another one where the answer is very different depending on whether are you looking at a field level or are you looking at the problem of plastic in landfills. And so the level of consideration drives how you may view that, which means you might love at a system level climate change, but at the field level, you may not be supportive of a material like ammonia extracts. And so those votes may seem contradictory when actually on the two questions, you're looking at a different part of the system. Our job is to take all of the comments at all the different levels and then look at OPFA and what OPFA says and determine whether to move forward based on that. Ammonia extracts, there will be another sort of work on that by the board. The board considered 3 motions. One of them they sent back to committee. And so we'll likely wait until that 3rd motion is discussed because we only want to move forward once on any particular issue.
Well, and you have to have all sides of the story, right? You can't, again, you got to have all the facts in order to make good decisions, which is super important. Well, thank you for that. And I appreciate the clarity, because to me, when I was, to me, it was like, okay, wait a second. But I love it. But I love the way that you framed it back up. And you're right. We have to look at everything, we're, to your point, is you looking at the planet? Are you looking at just down onto the ground, and how does it all fit? Because it's a really valid point that we've got, the food becomes important in all this as well. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that. And, that's what's going to feed this planet, right? And I think it's important to remember that the food is ultimately should be the winner in a lot of these conversations. You mentioned something about adding items to the NOSB to work plan, which is cool, outside of kind of what you guys are focused on. Who determines how and what gets added to the work plan like that?
It's a collaborative process. So the first point of collaboration is with the board itself, so that when the board says we'd really like to work on something, we actively talk about it. There is a group called the Executive Committee, which is all the chairs of the NOSB subcommittees. And we talk about a work agenda items that they would like to work on. And it's at that phase that if there are concerns, like, for example, the item might go outside of OPFA, or there's active litigation on it, or there are sort of boundaries that we'd want to stay in, that's where we have that conversation. Once we get an official request for a work agenda item, some of those I approve at the program level, and then some of them, if they're going to require something like rulemaking down the road, that's when it isn't a Jenny decision or even an NOP decision. We talk with the administration in terms of what are the regulatory priorities. If the board is working on this, here are the downstream implications of that for rulemaking. Do you want to move forward? So I think people forget these aren't just Jenny decisions. These are USDA system decisions about where we want to invest the board's time. These are volunteers. So we're also sensitive about not asking the board to work on something that we know we can't do anything with. So sometimes the board really wants to work on something, but it's outside our jurisdiction. we're not going to be able to do rulemaking on it. So I don't want them to spend their time on it. And that's because I want to protect them. No one wants to work on something and then have it not go anywhere. So it's a tough conversation.
Yeah. So, and my next question, and you kind of answered, I just wanted to draw it back up a little bit. So if something's being actively litigated, that's not going anywhere. That's not going on the work plan.
It is more challenging to work on things in litigation because at that point it's kind of moved from the collaborative discussion between the board and the program to a whole new level. And so this is where we have a bit of sort of outreach we do on NOP, the civics of NOP. So what are the civics of NOP? And there is this a triangle of here's Congress and here's the board and here's the program. And oh, by the way, here's the Justice Department and the judicial part of our government, which is very, very important. But once it is in litigation, we don't want to necessarily be working on emergent policy before a court has had a chance to weigh in on an active question.
Yeah, well, I was curious because I know that they're obviously the greenhouse container thing is a hot topic. It's been around a while. People are talking about it, but there's also the lawsuit that's pending that's in court now. And that's why I was wondering, like, okay, well, how do you kind of manage that? Because that would be, to your point, I mean, really valid, really hard to try to probably deal with that in that moment.
That's in appeal phase right now, and so we'll stand by and see what happens from that. And I think the outcome of that would then help inform any possible next steps.
I love it. Some of there's a lot of talk out there about different things that are needing to get worked on. Recommendations have been out, this process and stuff, and some of the recommendations that have been made in years past. They've been around a while. It is what it is. But do you feel like some of the older, NOSB recommendations that, are coming back up, that are being rediscussed and put through, do you think some of those requests need to go back down to the NOSB for work? Because look, the world's changed, community expectations have changed, commercial scale, availability of things have changed. It's a different world in some ways than it was a few years back. Do you think that's something that needs to happen that would help reunify the industry to move forward with current technology and current trends?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think there are a couple of items where that
doing good today.
Yeah. And so one area where that has come up is if the department were going to pick up, for example, aquaculture again. A few folks have commented, aquaculture has really changed since the board made its recommendations on that. Would it make sense to have the board do some work on that? Now, the benefit of that is you get the increased knowledge of what's happened in industry, increased participation. The downside is we all know that process takes a bunch of time, and the other thing we have to be aware of is political windows, right? And so we have seen that now in the organic program a few times, that if you miss a political window to get something done, and there is a significant change, it can impact the ability to move forward. So it's a risk to send things back to the NOSB because it adds time. At the same time, there are risks of not sending something back to the NOSB. I think another opportunity where we could consider sending things back to the NOSB is when we get a recommendation that is really clearly outside the boundaries of OTFA, and we've accepted it as a recommendation, but we actually think there would be benefit in the board going back to the board and saying, we like the ideas here, but this can't be rulemaking. It's too far outside the scope of the act. Please relook at it within these boundaries. And we've not done that before. I think that could be an interesting direction on some topics where rulemaking is going to be difficult because it is known that the board was kind of coloring outside the statutory line, so to speak. Right.
Interesting. And I love the perspective. Thank you for that. I think that'll help. I think that frames up a lot of thought that people have when they look at stuff. It's like, okay, what is the why? And your point's valid. I mean, bringing stuff up and having, emerging conversations about things that have changed in the world, not a bad thing, right? I mean, it's good to evolve. And I appreciate that response. Give me some surprises. Give me some breaking news. Give me something juicy. You dropped a couple of juicy bombs last time before the meeting. All right, what do we got? Besides us doing karaoke, which is already a done deal, that's happening. What's a surprise or some kind of a breaking news that you want to share? What can I get out of you?
I will share that we do now have 3 rules that are in various stages of USDA review and clearance. And so there's
Cool.
strengthening organic enforcement, final rule, origin of livestock, final rule, and the organic poultry and livestock standards proposed rule. And so that reflects a tremendous amount of work by the team over the last few months, where all of those are the first step of review is legal review, and all of those rules have made it into legal review. And so I think we are going to start seeing some rules popping out in the spring, and we're excited to share that work with the community.
That's awesome. I think it's great. Yeah. I mean, I love the fact, look, at the end of the day, and you talk about this, it's a process, right? And you have to, you can say whatever you want to say about any kind of process. Going to the doctor is a process, right? It doesn't matter. But at the end of the day is that if you participate in the process, you can make a difference. And that's really what this whole thing is about. Yeah. It's about the process from start to finish, which is why I wanted to lean into the Federal Register, because I don't think a lot of people understood that's part of the process.
It is. And sometimes the process takes time. And so, when we finish rulemaking on this, these will address many, many recommendations that have been in place for a long, long time. And democracy does take time. And so, but it will be nice to see kind of the fruit of those multi-year conversations.
I think it's fantastic. So what's next for the NOSB? I mean, I know we have springtime meeting, right?
Springtime meeting is scheduled in April.
New members, yeah.
We'll have new members hopefully announced later this fall. And so we have 4 vacancies that need to be filled. And so that is in process right now. I'm hoping we'll make an announcement late this year. So next meeting, we are hoping will be in person. It would be here in Crystal City, Virginia, which is where we were supposed to be last spring. And so, it's exciting times for both the board and the program.
I love it. Crystal City. It's where DC goes to have a good time. That's what I heard.
Well, there you go.
What's new and next at the NOP? I mean, what's new and exciting? Anything that you want to?
Yeah, I think for me, the most exciting piece is that we are in the process of kicking off all of our 9 human capital projects. So each team has developed their project plan and is really starting to share the good work they're doing and building partnerships with other organizations. And I've had so many groups say, this is work we've wanted to do and have needed to do for years. To actually have the funding to do it is changing the game. And so that part is inspiring. This is where we are building the inspectors of the next generation. And so to talk about projects where we're developing the kid who's going to be on the board in 20 years, it is a very exciting and inspirational process to listen to these project teams talk about what they're doing. So look forward in the next month to rolling out deliverables as that work is complete and seeing the kind of the fruits of those labors.
I love it. I mean, look, it's about the process, right? And I think you're absolutely right. You guys are taking steps to protect tomorrow, and it's taking a lot of work today. And I don't, and I don't want to, kind of beat a dead horse, but it's like, I don't think people actually understand. It's like, well, where are the inspectors going to come from? How is this going to work in 20 years? And that's a really valid conversation. So
and
I appreciate
luckily there are a lot of good people out there who are giving a lot of good thought to that, is how do you build the pipeline, develop the pipeline, maintain the pipeline of the people who will again protect that organic apple that you and I will eat when we are in the old folks home.
Yeah, but doing karaoke, mark my words.
Doing karaoke. Yes.
I love it. Jenny, you've been, as always, fantastic. Is there anything else you want to drop in? Did I miss anything? I think we covered a pretty good wrap up, which I think is good. I think people are going to be like, oh crap, I should have participated. Duh.
Well, there's another chance in the spring. And so
That's
Todd,
true.
I love talking to you. It was fun being with you today.
Thank you. It's absolutely my pleasure. And thank you for taking the time to hang out with us and to kind of come full circle on this. And again, we can't make changes if we don't get involved. And it's so important. And this is such a, we're talking about our, everything that I think is important to everybody, your food, the planet, climate, next generation of jobs, the next generation of farmers. All of this is a part of this process that you guys do every single day. And, I say it every time I'm with you. Thank you. Thank you for getting up this morning and making a difference. Thank you for keeping your team motivated. hopefully, you know, your team is, by the time we get done with our run, is 600 people inside your office. I know we're all going to fit, but I hope we get a staff that's that big, because we're doing 600 billion in sales, you know, and we are making just such a huge impact. So thank you very much for hanging out. Everybody get a part of the process, you know, just get on the website, read a little bit, spend 5 minutes of your lunch hour just reading and go, oh, wow, I didn't know that. And then read something else and get more informed, because we need your help and we need your support all the way through this process.
Well put, Todd.
I try to end on a positive. So thank you again, Jenny. Come back. I mean, you know, you now somebody's going to try to dethrone you. You got to come in for 4 now. The bar's been raised. You got to keep raising the bar for us.
I look forward to it, Todd. It's always good
Awesome.
to talk to you.
You too. Thanks everybody for hanging out on Todd-Bits. We'll see you soon. Remember, go inspire somebody today. It's not hard to do, and it's very, very important. We appreciate you. Take care.